The establishment, I mean, they are literally in universities, which receive federal funding. That's just the most obvious way in which they're connected to the establishment. But those universities have always been, they've been training grounds for the elite. That's what they've always been. I mean, still to this day, if you go to Harvard, we know that your expectation is to go run society after that. And that's who's in Congress, and that's who's the CEOs are. They went to all those very important universities. So sure, I think that's right. It's their position. It's their subjectivity, as postmodernists would say, that determines their analysis in some ways, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think you can, in a meta sort of way, you can also think about, I wrote about this a bit last year, but, there's an interesting passage in Christopher Lasch's Revolt of the Elites where he talks about, he kind of roots the sort of popularization of a postmodern sensibility, right? Where you basically think that, that any kind of sense of a sort of base material reality has been lost, and we live in this world of kind of signifiers, as we might say, right? Where reality is just a kind of tissue of signifiers. That basically this idea is rooted, Lasch argues, and this is interesting because it's kind of a throwaway path. It's not like even a significant, he doesn't even dedicate a chapter to this, but he basically argues that it's completely logical that the people who came to accept this worldview were, if you look at the material circumstances in which they existed, right, which was particularly a situation in which even before the population at large was kind of taken up in this world of information and communication technology, right? They were inhabiting this world, right? Academics and other kind of white collar professionals were inhabiting this world of computers and of communications and information, right? Before anybody else, right? And so we can take some of the, part of this ideology as a reflection of the material and professional circumstances that they inhabited, right? And then, then we can also take this as a sort of, ironically, because a great deal of this kind of body of theory was actually kind of targeting the sort of technocratic post-war regimes that had emerged. But, it could become a kind of official ideology of the people operating in that world that in some way supports and justifies their status within it.
Right. Absolutely. And Trumpism, and unfortunately, you and I are among the only vaccine hesitant or whatever we are, skeptics, I guess, lockdown skeptics, pretty much who aren't Trump people. I mean, that's one of the problems, right? Taking our position. It's just a fact that the vast majority of people who are on our side on COVID, at least, are somehow associated with Trump, right? I mean, and Trump, by the way, and you've said this yourself, so Trump has been seen himself as a virus even before COVID came along. So it's quite ironic and amusing, right? That the two things are happening at the same time, right? We got rid of one virus, we expelled him from the body politic, and now we have a new one, but he's to blame for this one also.
Yeah. And I mean, another thing I'm interested in is the whole, one thing that COVID allows is for a kind of new mutation, we might say, of this panic about misinformation and so on, right? That kind of that emerged alongside the Trump phenomenon. And so, what part of what you see is this. We have this metaphor of virality, right? That is, and weirdly, this is an aside, but you had all these bizarre, articles like when COVID was spreading, where it was like, COVID spreads just like internet memes or something like that. And it's like, well, the whole point of like that metaphor of virality. So it's just this odd reversing back into the source of the metaphor. But in any case, what happened is that they merged, right? And so, my opinion is that the trajectory that led to like Trump being banned from social media finally was partly made possible by these kinds of attempts to crack down. COVID provided an alibi for a much more heavy-handed kind of censorship online. And so what happened was basically that, if you think about like a year ago or a year and a few months ago, you started seeing this like labeling on Twitter and other sites, right? And it all had to do with COVID, right? And so it, this idea that misinformation or whatever kills, right, had already been circulating, but the COVID allowed for the sense of danger to be escalated.
Yeah.
And then that, I think, was part of what enabled the justification of this, again, much more heavy-handed approach.
Yeah.
And so, so I think that, and then, interestingly, the most dramatic consequence of that was Trump himself getting banned, which sort of makes sense in that on one hand, he was kind of the original vector of this whole panic, or the original kind of prompt for this whole panic about misinformation,
right,
which then I think morphed into this panic about COVID, which became fused with that, and then ultimately led to his banning, which I doubt would have been quite as easy to do had they not already been, extremely heavy-handedly taking down anything that contradicted whatever the latest, system update of the consensus was. Often in ways that were themselves self-contradictory.
Yeah.